in my experience, most artists are spiritual. You know, they're open to talks about spirituality and the universe and and third eye and all these other things. Like Ravi, Dr. Zacharias has this phrase. He says, I don't know if he's quoting from someone else, but he says, we live in a time, we live in a moment where people can believe anything as long as you don't believe that it's true. And that's what I find as like, belief in a higher power, that's fine. Belief in God, even belief in Jesus, that's even fine. I mean, Jesus is an admirable figure. He was moral. He told the truth. He's all about love, and so even believing in Jesus is okay. But the moment you believe in it so much where you're actually willing to articulate and communicate why you believe it, to someone else, then it becomes, wait a minute, you really believe that?
Thank you for watching another episode of the Jude 3 Project podcast. As always, I'm your host, Lisa Fields, the founder of the Jude 3 Project. And today I'm joined by another special guest, Warner Miller. Welcome, Warner.
Hi. Pleasure to be here. Pleasure to be here.
I'm excited to have you on. I found out about you when I was with our friends at RZIM last week, and KJ, that is on the team at RZIM, was like, "Have you ever heard of Warner Miller? You need to know him. He's going through our program, and I think he would really enjoy the work you're doing. And he's doing some really cool work as well." So KJ connected us. Thank you, KJ, if you're watching this, for the connection. And I asked you to be on the podcast to talk about something that I think is really, really important. But before we get into that, our topic for today, just tell the audience just a little bit about yourself.
Okay, will do. Well, firstly, I have to tell everyone, confess this. I was a follower and admirer of Miss Lisa Fields as well as the Jude 3 Project for quite some time. So before KJ even mentioned me to you, I was following you on all the social medias and the face twits and whatnots and YouTube. So it is definitely my honor
Thank you.
and pleasure to be on here. I appreciate the work you do. Little background about myself. I am from Brooklyn, which is where I am now. From Brooklyn, I am an actor by trade. That's what I do for a living. Professional actor, based out of New York. I serve as a youth minister at Christian Cultural Center in Brooklyn, New York, where the pastor is Dr. A.R. Bernard. As KJ mentioned, I am a graduate, fairly recent, of Oxford Center for Christian Apologetics, at Oxford University in Oxford, England, not Oxford, Pennsylvania. I have to see, you laugh, but you don't know how much I have to clarify that to some people. Sometimes I say, yeah, I mean, if it comes up, oh, yeah, I went to Oxford. Well, Oxford, Texas? No, Oxford, England. But so yeah, I'm a recent graduate of there, and yeah, and I like Marvel movies, and I love riding my bike, and I'm a jogger, and I like to see people come into relationship with Christ. That pretty much sums me up.
Awesome. Well, tell our audience just some movies that you've been in, because they probably recognize you from
Right,
something.
right. Um, well, I mean, the biggest movie I was in was American Gangster. That was a couple years ago with Denzel Washington. I played one of his brothers. That was actually my first movie. That was my first movie. But more recently, the shows that I've been on Boardwalk Empire. Um, been on Luke Cage. That's probably the most recent and the one I get stopped on the street or in the barbershop for. I was the one that killed Pops. I killed Pops, and I got definitely I got dealt with But yeah, that was me. I killed Pops, and I actually just got finished wrapping a new play that's prayerfully moving to Broadway called Soul the Stax musical about Stax Records. So that's should be coming fairly soon to Broadway theater in New York soon. But yeah, those are the biggest ones I've been on.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And that goes to a little bit of what we're going to talk about today,
Mhm.
engaging artists with apologetics. I know this is something that's close, near and dear to your heart, and kind of one of the reasons you got into apologetics. Can you kind of explain why apologetics became a passion for you?
Right, sure. Well, when I so I wasn't born a Christian. I came to faith relatively, well, not relatively late, but in my 20s, late teens, when I was in college, and I was raised in a family that my mother was she would say that she was a Christian and whatnot, but I never really affirmed or held to that faith because I don't know if I was discipled or I just it never stuck with me. I did have a grandmother that was a praying grandmother that very much deposited faith into me and biblical study, but again, it was never anything that I owned. And through high school specifically, when I began to kind of think about these things, I definitely passively came to an understanding that Christianity was probably something that just people do, because a lot of my interactions with Christians, I mean, not all of them, definitely not all of them, but certainly more than a few, where like Christians are, most of them don't know what they believe. They act one way this day, but then act another way. Like I was funny. I was just talking to a friend of mine. Who said, I told him, I was like, listen, when I was in high school, some of the, not for nothing, some of the easiest girls were the Christians, and that's kind of, as a non-Christian, seeing the young ladies who on Sundays would be, doing all the dances, but then every other day they were like the ones that, listen, if you want to, do something, those ones, that's kind of the mindset I grew up with. And the men, just were not, I didn't find many strong male Christian uh people that I could, refer to. Not to say there weren't any, but definitely not a lot. So uh, something happened to me my senior year in high school as I was graduating. It was, one of those profound moments where God, if you get me out of this thing, I promise I'll, and not for nothing, in my 18-year-old mind, I was sincere, as sincere as I could be at 18 years old, and I said that, God, if you get me out of this situation, that I of my own doing, that I would find out who you are. It was, they were, because I always did believe that there was a God. I never disbelieved the existence of a higher power, but I didn't know whether, who it was, he was, she was, they were, you know. So by the grace of God, the circumstance of my own making, I was saved from, and I committed to what I said, and I was gonna, search out who this higher power was, and it was through a long series of events when I was in college. Um, I eventually came to believe that Jesus Christ, the person of Jesus Christ, was exactly who he said he was. That he was God, that he was Savior, that he was Redeemer. And the irony of all of this is because, again, especially when I got to college, I had already, again, passively decided that Christianity probably wasn't true. Again, just because, like when I would engage with, like, Rastas, when I would engage with, like, Buddhists or like atheists and something like that, they were very knowledgeable about why, or at least in my 18, 19, 20-year old head, very knowledgeable of why they didn't believe or did believe this. And the Christians in my life, or at least most of them, really the breadth and width of their apologetic reason for why they believe what they believe is because, God is good. You don't know what he did in my life, which all are, are legitimate, but for someone who is seeking, they really didn't answer the questions of why Jesus and not Muhammad? Why Jesus and not Buddha? Why Jesus and not Krishna? You know, their explanations, at least to me, were very subjective. So going to your question, so when ironically I did finally come to Christ, it was very important to me to not only understand that I believed it, but why I believed it. Not just for other people. In fact, they came secondarily, first for me. Because even when I did come to Christ, I still had doubts. I still would not call myself a Christian because I didn't want to be associated with what I believe to be, hypocrisy and the established church and all this other stuff. I remember like I used to call myself a disciple. And that sounded cooler in my head. I'm a disciple. I'm a disciple of Jesus Christ. The notion of being called a Christian would mean, succumbing to, the oppressors, religion, or just being a part of this thing that I didn't want to be a part of. And so again, it was very important to me, for me, that reason was attached to my faith. And that phrase, reason and faith, although I knew it theoretically, the actual wording kind of came to me when and this is a crazy story. I saw this book on my grandmother's bookshelf called Jesus Among Other Gods. Now, at this point, I am a follower of Jesus Christ. But again, like I said, I still had doubts. I still probably, if given enough evidence, maybe could have been nudged the other way, maybe. And so I saw this book, and I'm thinking that this book is about like an expose, exposing, Christianity for what it is, or exposing Jesus what it is. And it actually ended up being one of the very first um, books or writings that I saw, that one came from this man who was actually a thinking Christian, which in my head was almost an oxymoron a little bit. He was very much an intelligent, reasoned, level-headed thinker, with all these degrees, but he's also an affirming Christian, an evangelistic Christian at that. And the person is Dr. Ravi Zacharias, who would later become one of my professors at Oxford. Um, and uh, and in the book, I believe on page 60 or 63, something like that, at the bottom of the page it says, "Faith is not bereft of reason. Faith is not bereft or without reason." And that phrase literally changed my whole paradigm of Christianity, because I thought, even as a believer, I thought that there was a certain amount of, you know, for lack of a better phrase, mind checking that you had to do. Um, that there comes a point where uh, you have to disregard reality, and and by him saying faith is not bereft of reason, it informed me that, listen, if this is true, then it can be poked, it can be prodded, it can be tested. You can raise the hood on it, you can check underneath the hood, you can kick the tires, and if it's true, it'll withhold and sustain and stand its ground. And from that, I became, not that I was ever really afraid, but I really began to delve into what I would later understand to be apologetics.
Mhm.
That is the long story behind it.
When we talked the other day, you talked to me about the challenges you face engaging artists, and that's really something I want to dive into today, because I think artists kind of set the tone for a culture in a lot of
Mhm.
ways, and a lot of people, whether they be actors, musicians, um, various types of artists, um, kind of dictate where culture goes. Especially in some forms of belief systems, in a
Sure.
sense. And when you're engaging artists, whether it be actors more so, what is your kind of, what do you get from the conversations as far as where most people are with faith.
Right. Well, the again, another irony, and maybe this is just how God, in His graciousness, kind of deals with me. But many times I'm engaged by people versus me initiating. Although there are those times when I do. Many times I'm engaged, because not for nothing, most artists, or you know, I don't want to overgeneralize, but certainly in my experience, most artists are spiritual. You know, they're open to talks about spirituality and the universe, and and third eye and all these other things. Like Robbie, Dr. Zacharias has this phrase. He says, I don't know if he's quoting from someone else, but he says, we live in a time, we live in a moment where people can believe anything as long as you don't believe that it's true.
Hmm.
And that's what I find as, like, belief in a higher power, that's fine. Belief in God, even belief in Jesus, that's even fine. I mean, Jesus is an admirable figure. He was moral. He told the truth. He's all about love, and so even believing in Jesus is okay. But the moment you believe in it so much where you're actually willing to articulate and communicate why you believe it, to someone else, then it becomes, wait a minute, you really believe that? You really believe it in so much that it actually changes how you conduct yourself. It changes or informs how you speak and things like that. So in my engagement, most time, and most times, if not, I say like maybe 98, 99 percent of the time, it's always civil. Like, it's never argumentative. Sometimes they're, like, we disagree and you go back and forth, but it's never a screaming match or disrespectful. Is always, you know um information sharing. Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, but what about this? Oh yeah, but I don't like when people do. Oh yeah, but okay, but it's always that sort of. So that's been my experience. Uh, uh, Building, chopping it up, talking about, life. And one thing that I do notice is that, many artists, whether it be black or white, but, definitely a large majority of black artists, are familiar with the person of Jesus, and even Christianity, and even church, or their perception of church. A lot of people are interested in not so much, why does this why Jesus and not this? Although, I mean, they are interested in that, but more so, I find they want, okay, I get that you're a Christian. How does this look out there? How does a reasoned, devout faith look outside of the four walls of the church? Because all I've seen are weirdos. I'm speaking on there. All I've seen are weirdos. All I've seen are, angry people, shouting what they're against. All I see is, forgive me, all I see is, older white males, that are Republicans or something like that. That's all I see. How does this, what you're talking about, translate to everyday life, particularly being an artist, being a man, being a black man, being at one time I was single, being a taken man. How does, what does that look like? So so in my experience, that's a lot of the underlying of it. Okay, I get that you're a Christian, but what does that look like? You
Hmm.
know,
So more of them seeing Christianity malpractice in a sense,
very
and
much so.
wanting to see it lived out. Um, Orthodoxy is important for
Absolutely,
them.
absolutely, absolutely.
More so than they reason. It's like I can get with it logically, and it makes sense to a degree, but I haven't seen anybody actually walk this out outside of the four walls.
Yeah, and not that, because First Peter 3:15, not that we shouldn't have that reasoned, that ability to think through, because that's also what they're looking for: authentic, people that are authentic, people that are they've thought through certain things. Like, how does your Christianity look when it, in regard to, the oppression of minorities? Or, what does it look like in politics? What does it look like in childcare and healthcare? How does that apply? Um, so yeah, but with all of that, they also the ability to reason it and to explain it exactly what you believe outside of I believe it because my mommy and daddy, raised me like that. I believe it because I was brought up in the church or raised in church. Those as good as they may be for you, that doesn't help anybody or
Mhm,
most people. That doesn't help.
mhm,
So yeah.
mhm. Yeah, and I think that's so crucial. I think when I see artists that come to church,
Hmm.
often they are kind of treated in a fan mode. That
Yeah.
preachers sometimes can go fan mode on them and want to highlight that this person was there,
Right.
which doesn't help with them growing in discipleship. If you
Right.
platform a person as soon as they walk in the door just because they have a platform outside the doors. Have you seen that as far as artists saying, I went to church, but when I went, I was treated like a celebrity and not a person?
Well, honestly, so that I haven't gotten. Maybe that's because I'm not like Will Smith level yet. So those circles that I run in aren't that big. But I what I do get, I either I mean I get a whole bunch of things. I don't want to overgeneralize, but I certainly get the uh I was brought up in church. They were only interested in my gift, like so I could have whatever sort of lifestyle or do whatever, but because I sang really, really well, and they may not articulate it in that way, but that's kind of the gist of it. My gift was what was of, value or, and and that, that also feeds into the, church as entertainment, church as this machine of just exploiting people's gifts, without of a place that takes but doesn't really give or doesn't give any more than just reading a self-help book. What I'm saying? um I also have friends that are saved. And there are times when, and I mean, this happened to me, but on far fewer occasions where you do go to, fellowship to worship, and you get, people, stopping you, or, hey man, that was a great job you did on this, and my hands are raised and in prayer and reverence, and I mean, they're it's a genuine appreciation. However, I find that, and if I'm experiencing it on this level, I'm sure people, higher than me experience it on a bigger level. I find that um, they forget that celebrities, artists, actors, entertainers, they need Christ too. And I mean, I was gonna say more so, but no, I mean, no more so than someone else. Like they need Christ too. And many times the faithful servant, the one who's not famous, the one who's not in a position of notoriety, those are the ones that the faithful witness, those are the ones that whose testimony and preaching rings the loudest. Because what all they're doing is being faithful. All they're doing is being consistent, all they're doing is being authentic. you know um so yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but yeah.
That helps. Um, so I want to go back to something you said because I hear a lot of folks say it now. Um, when we talk about the universe, and that seems
Mhm.
like a buzzword just for young professionals, artists,
Mhm.
not speaking of God, but the higher power or the universe. Will I trust the universe to do what's right?
Mhm.
Um, how do you engage that thought on?
Right.
I'm sure you engage it because I think it comes from artists. As far as how it's permeated the culture, them using
Right.
it in the interviews and people picking up on it, and that's how they think about like a higher power.
Right. 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 Well, I mean, I will say, I'm like I said, I'm in Brooklyn. I'm in New York. So I mean, even outside of artists, you hear it in New York, you hear it in the city, you hear, young, the universe, and a part of me, like I get it. I think. some of it comes from the desire to disassociate themselves with organized religion. you know um so rather than say God and kind of construct this man-made mechanism, in order to be inclusive, and again to disassociate myself from the establishment, the universe seems like a very open, you know uh tolerant, accessible thing to say. And not that I've gotten into a few of those conversations, not much, because like I don't want to go back and forth with semantics, versus really I want to introduce you to Christ and why this is. But in the times that I do, I mean, it's a very simple, even using a little bit of apologetic thought. All right, let's think through this. You're saying the universe, so you're claiming deity to something that's scientifically breaking down. The law of thermodynamics, things fall apart. The universe is expanding, so one, that means it had a beginning. So so then it's going to have an end. So the just rationally to give deity, to give lordship, to give godship to something that is dying, to an entity that is dying, I think, you know using their reasoned, rational, God-given minds, that does seem inconsistent, versus you know giving the praise, the acknowledgement, to the creator of that thing. Even if you don't regard it as God, even if at this point you're unwilling to regard it as Yahweh or Jehovah, again, just reason would tell us that the universe can't be deity. The universe can't be the Most High. You know, so that's where, if in those conversations, if they do come up, that's where I try to appeal to. And again, that doesn't you know uh, you know make exclusive the claims of Christ specifically, or the God of the Bible. But what it does do is it puts that pebble in their shoe to at least acknowledge that, okay, maybe this reason, this rational reason that I've been using, maybe it's a bit flawed. And hopefully they, okay, now why do I think like that? I was telling one of my coworkers, I've said this before. I believe that if Christianity, now just rock with me real quick, because it's going to sound kind of ridiculous, but just hold me. I believe if Christianity came out like 2 days ago, most people would be Jesus followers. Every time I get into a conversation with someone, or we're talking about why they're not Christians or why they don't go to church, it rarely, if ever, has anything to do with Christ. It always has to do with, well, the church did this, the Christian did this, or I don't, the Bible, I don't understand this and that. It rarely, if ever, has to do with Jesus Christ. And again, I bring that up kind of dovetailing on what I just spoke about the universe, is that people's desire to disassociate themselves from what they perceive to be the oppressive establishment. Um, there's this quote by I think George MacDonald, I could be, he says, or Malcolm Muggeridge, he says that we have educated ourselves into imbecility. And that's what I find, that we want to disassociate ourselves so much from what we regard as the establishment, that we educate ourselves, and we get this knowledge, and I use knowledge with air quotes, and we get so much knowledge that we've educated ourselves into ignorance. And that's and what's worse than ignorance is ignorance that thinks itself to be brilliance. That's the hardest thing to go through.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the end.
So, so you find it, as you're talking about kind of your strategy for engaging, you find that you kind of pick your battles, whether you're going to discuss, um, as it relates to, are we going to tackle what you're calling the universe, and how you're relating it to deity? Are we going to tackle that? What things in the conversations? I want to get real practical, because
Okay.
people are engaging people on this level every day at
Mhm.
work. Um, and so they're trying to figure out, how do I navigate the conversation? How do you determine what which points you're gonna hone in on, or if I'm
Right.
gonna deal with the universe thing, or if I'm
Right.
gonna deal with something else, or if I'm gonna deal with church. How do you navigate that?
There's this term in acting parlance where we say, finding your objective. What's my motivation? What do I want in a scene? And what it is you, regardless of what the lines are, regardless of what's the blocking is, or meaning like where you go, physically in a scene, you're always to go towards your objective, to meet your objective. What that does, that makes the scene interesting. That makes obviously more fun on stage to do that. But there's also, I guess, a parallel in life. You play your objective, and within the context of engaging different people for Christ, my objective is always, always, always to communicate the gospel of Jesus Christ. That is always the objective. That's my end game. Regardless of how I start, where the journey takes me, and may take me over to, philosophy, or not even talking about something, at a particular, time. But my objective, what's in my head, is always to point someone ultimately to the person of Jesus Christ. And that should be the objective for any apologetic discourse. Engaging in banter back or forth, or, apologetic discourse just for the sake of, I know this, I know that, I know this, I know that, that glorifies nothing but yourself. So that's never been an interest of mine at all, nor a desire. So with that, because that's my objective, there's never like a script with people, because people are people. They're individuals. They're not projects. They're not notches to get on my evangelistic belt. I talk to this one, or quotas, anything like that. People are people, and we would do right to treat people like they're people and not projects. So with that, because there is no script, I get to engage and actually be friends, with someone. Or I mean, maybe not friends, but at least there's a relationship there. And once we're in that relationship, I get to learn about them, they get to learn about me. Ultimately, my faith is going to come up, not because I shoehorn it into a conversation, but it absolutely does come up. Now, again, sharing the gospel is always in the back of my mind. So eventually it is going to get there eventually. So it's not like, this is happenstance and, oh, it just so happens. No, it's always been there. So there is some intentionality there. But in as far as me having a script that I give to everyone, no, that's never the case. And sometimes, like, I'll have conversations where the person I'm talking to is as high as a kite, or they, didn't had a bunch of beers and they're a little tipsy or something like that. It comes how it comes, but the point is to always be available, be willing, and know what your objective is. Because if you know what your objective is, and if it's the gospel, then regardless of how you get there, you're gonna get there. So that's I guess, I don't know if that's as practical, because it doesn't give step by step, but I'm always wary to give people formulas and scripts, because it makes the people that you're talking to, feel like they're just a quota. They're just, the only reason you're talking to me is to proselytize to me, and that is a gate, right there.
Hmm. And that's definitely helpful, because I think even like a lot of evangelism training is a step-by-step guide to how to get somebody to salvation.
Right.
And so then when you like go out on evangelism um um days, or you hit the street or wherever, the people have these step-by-step instructions on how to get somebody to convert,
Right.
and without realizing that those step-by-steps is sometimes the reason why people won't convert, because they feel like you're saying, you're just trying to get a notch in your belt or a check off that you did something, without really engaging them as human beings.
Right. And not, it's not like, that doesn't um, remove you as the believer, as a Christian, from knowing what the gospel is. You absolutely should do that, and that actually helps inform how you do engage, because like it's kind of like basketball. I remember when Allen Iverson came out, and Allen Iverson had his sick handles and whatnot, and you had a bunches of young kids not working on fundamentals and going quickly to this and that and this and that, and they were sloppy, and it was like a couple years of just awful, awful, awful basketball. And you got a Kobe Bryant who is able to do a lot of that, but he practices fundamentals. And I believe knowing the gospel is the fundamentals. If you know the fundamentals, then you can riff. Then you can go off, then you can, divert over here, and because you know that, okay, this is the trail to get back. Um, sometimes, there are people that, having them understand their sin is paramount. Having them understand, I mean, it's paramount for everyone, but in this particular case, understanding, no, Jesus didn't just come as a moral leader. He came because we're broken. He came because the chasm between myself and God is deep and unjumpable. We're broken. And unless you understand how broken you are, me going into why the universe is not the universe, or this is, it's null and void, because you still think yourself to be a great person. you know but then there's sometimes the people, like when I was in England, I used to uh go to the, I'm sorry, there's something coming up my phone. I used to go to the prisons to do to do outreach, talk to inmates. We chop it up. And the irony is, now I don't know if it's ironic, but many of the prisoners, like, or the inmates, we never had to go into, like, this sin. Yada. They absolutely knew how broken they were. They absolutely knew how broken they were, because for them, they had the living representation of being behind bars and having their freedom taken away from them to affirm, yes, I know I'm a sinner. I know I'm a sinner. Now, whether they accept Christ is a different thing, but they were very aware of their depravity. We on the outside tend to, and especially if you've had success as an artist or anything, but in this case, as an artist, as an actor, performer, if you've had a lot of success, and you got, people, kissing your backside, figuratively, and you have, like, money like that, and you're beautiful, and you're articulate, um, to hear that you're broken, to hear that that there's no way in and of yourself that you could please God, or earn His salvation, is a large pill to swallow. Is a hard pill to swallow. In fact, many times that's the line drawn in the sand. All right, yeah, man, Jesus is cool. Yeah, man, Jesus. Yeah, man, He loves, and I need love. Oh, wait. You telling me I'm depraved? You telling me that there's no way I can meditate? I can't meditate enough. I can't, go to the. I can't do yoga enough. I can't, go to the, be centered enough to earn it. To hear that, nah, B, nah, you can't do that. That is, I mean, you can do it, but it ain't gonna put you in no better standing with God. That's hard. So for those people, yeah, absolutely. Hearing that, no, no, you need a savior. Not just that Jesus is a good idea. No, you actually need Him, and this is why you need Him. Jesus says, "Don't lie," and we lie. Jesus says, "Love your neighbor as yourself." Now, that may sound easy to you, but which one of y'all love your neighbor as yourself? Better than yourself? Which one of y'all love the Lord with all your heart, mind, and soul? Jesus says do all those things. That the easy, loving Jesus gives you a standard that you can't possibly meet. How do you reconcile that? So that's how these conversations go. They're far more organic than structured. The only structure in it is the understanding of what the gospel is.
Mhm. Something I want to ask you, because you're dealing in a world where people have a measure of success on some levels. It depends on what acting circle. How are they? How does it? How do I want to ask this? With the recent suicides of Anthony Bourdain and Kate Spade, you see that success for many people, outward success, is not enough.
Hmm.
Do you find that something that you see frequently in some of the spaces you occupy, and how do you minister to that?
Right. It's funny. I'm actually like trying to write something based on that because I hear um, many of my colleagues, uh, both who are artists and who are actually even Christians as well. They talk about they immediately go to mental illness, which is absolutely legitimate, absolutely relevant to the discussion of suicide, of all those things. They're absolutely relevant. But many times, what I don't hear is um, we live in a world where uh, feeling good is equated to happiness. And
Mm-hmm.
if I don't feel good, I'm not happy. And we have that pumped in through media, we have that pumped in through our music, we even have it pumped into a lot of our church songs, we have it pumped into like it's constantly pumped into us that feeling good equals being happy. And the fact is, it is impossible to feel good all the time. And if you haven't that, now I'm sort of simplifying what I've been thinking about, but if you have that view that happiness equates to feeling good, inevitably you're not going to feel good. And we have death, that doesn't we have loss of loved ones. We have what Jim Carrey said this one thing. He said that it is a great saying. He said that he hopes that everyone that's pursuing success achieves it so that they can find that they need more. And what he means is that like if your goal in life is to chase success, I hope you find it, because then you'll realize that you need something else. Success doesn't sustain you. And the thing is, if you haven't been taught or haven't had the mindset that um or ways to deal with lack of happiness, that don't include a pill, or don't include something, I don't know, medicinal or anything like that. If you haven't found a way to cope, then eventually our society is built towards, yeah, I mean, since my life is my own, and since I'm not happy with it, I have every right to end it. So I don't see it as a shock. I mean, I don't know if that's the right word, but for lack of a better word, I don't see it as a shock that the increase of suicides have risen. Like I read recently that suicide is the second largest killer for people 10 to 17 years old, and that makes a kind of a sick sense. If you've been kind of pumped in that happiness and you've been given the ways to cope, of course. So I haven't gotten to those conversations yet. I'm still kind of mulling over how I want to, because I don't want to be insensitive, because suicide is a real thing, and people are losing their loved ones, their children, their grandparents, to these things. So I haven't quite, mulled over how I want to couch it, um, but if I were to tentatively engage into that conversation, um, that's sort of kind of where I would go. The fact that we kind of live in a culture that in some ways endorses suicide. If your life ain't happy, you know, and your life is yours, it's not God's, it's yours, you know, why not end it? You know. Um, so yeah, I'm still mulling that over, but I know eventually, more and more of those conversations I'm gonna engage in,
Yeah,
because it's happening more and more.
yeah. I think a balance in the conversation is important because I hear even when we're talking about like school shootings or suicide,
Right, right,
the go to is mental illness.
right,
And so then you'll say, well, some of these people that are doing these drastic school shootings aren't mentally ill. They are fully aware what they are doing. They're just full of evil,
right.
and full
Yeah,
of themselves. Um, and
yeah,
so, and then on the flip side, when we're talking about suicide, there is a lack of treatment for so many that are struggling with mental
Mm-hmm.
illness.
Mm-hmm.
And so many are struggling in silence and not getting the help they need, whether it's a therapist, whether it be medicine. So that is a real thing. But also on
Mm-hmm.
the counter, there are some people who don't struggle with mental illness,
Mm-hmm.
and commit suicide. So it is
Right.
a balance of knowing which side of the coin you're on.
Right.
Um, but it's hard to tell that usually because the person is gone. So you're not able to kind of interview them to see where they were and their
Right.
mental state leading up to that. So that's kind of the catch 22 on that one.
Right.
Um, but yeah, it's interesting how success is never sufficient.
Right.
Um, the eyes of man are never satisfied. And I mean, you can on a basic level, I remember graduating from high school and being excited, but then you're on to the next big thing. So it's
Right.
like, I
Right.
gotta go to college. And then when you finish with college, you're that last semester you're excited because you're about to graduate. And then you graduate and it's like, okay, what's next? And so
What's
you have
next?
these,
What's next?
yeah, you have these high expectations for moments. There's several things that I've achieved even with Jude 3. And then I'm like, okay, what's the next thing we're going to do?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's every peak or every goal that you set, it's never, it's ultimately never enough because only Christ satisfies. I
Right.
remember Diddy.
And it's okay. And I'm
Oh,
sorry.
oh, Oh, I was going to say, I remember Diddy said that he missed most of his greatest moments early on because he was always looking for the next thing. So most of the success he got when he had first Grammy and Missing You came out and it was a big hit and all of those things, a lot of those things were a blur to him because he was so busy focused on the next thing that he didn't focus on what he was achieving in that moment.
Right.
And I think
Right.
that's what it's depressing if you're always looking for another mountain to climb.
And that and I agree. And that because I wonder about like my brothers and sisters that are or our brothers and sisters that are like in the Middle East or Asia or um or even certainly the continent the continent of Africa. um I wonder if the suicide rate has gone up at all or as much as it's gone up in the West. I think I'm inclined to believe that our this notion of constantly pursue success is more of a Western phenomenon. Like we have this like these ideas of stuff will make me happy. The accumulation of stuff will make me happy, as opposed to what I find a lot of brothers in the East and sisters in the East, things like family or a rootedness in their whether it's Yahweh or even in Islam to some degree, a rootedness in an acknowledgement that stuff will never fill what's ultimately important. Stuff is a good pacifier. You know, um, I used to use this analogy that I don't really drink soda like that anymore, especially like the like Coke, whatnot. But like when I was a kid, when you get thirsty, like you see the commercials with it, he's drinking the Coke bottle and the sweat is dripping on it, and you're like, and it wasn't until like I was in my 20s, I was like, man, every time I drink soda, it makes me thirstier. It makes me thirstier, thirstier, thirstier. And then on top of that, I drink it and drink it and drink it. And not only I'm drinking all this soda, but the sugar is also like not good for my body either. And that's kind of like how stuff is, like it'll quench your thirst maybe in the moment, but then you find like you need more and you need more and you need more and you just it like begets, and while it's begetting it's eating away at certain maybe groundedness or moral sensibilities as opposed to Christ. And I don't think it's a coincidence that Christ calls himself not the living Kool-Aid or the living orange juice. He calls himself the living water, because water satisfies. Water quenches that thirst. You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah, I think that's a perfect illustration appreciation for it, because I was USA Today had an article, and I'm trying to find the quote before we close because I thought it was so great. But USA Today wrote an article about, Americans are depressed and suicidal because something is wrong with our culture.
Mm,
And it says, we exist largely disconnected from our extended families, friends, and communities, except in shallow interactions of social media. Because we are too busy trying to make it, in quotes, without realizing that once you reach your goal, it won't be enough.
right, 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 right. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
And I
yeah,
think that,
that's essentially it.
yeah.
That's essentially it. I
Social
wanted to
media.
say before we close, just this because you had asked the question, and then I don't know if I really gave a or at least as thoughtful of an answer as I wanted to. But in as far as um, to your question about engaging artists or engaging like that context, I mean, it's not that different than I think just our society as it exists right now. But I think more than anything, authenticity, as opposed to like a good, you know, philosophic apologetic. And that's great. And you should mull over and think through tough questions and what affects our world. Whether it's social justice, whether it's suicide, whether it's politics. You should think through these things and see how our faith or your faith affects or responds to this. However, that along with authenticity, um, deep thought, and I'm this is being affirmed and reaffirmed so much, especially recently. Loving them, loving your neighbor. Love is such an underrated, overstated tool that especially as followers of Jesus Christ we have. If we as believers claim to follow the God who says that he is love, and Jesus says that, you love them like I love you. Um, if we were to really engage in that, um, I think a lot of the 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 places where we get stumped for answers wouldn't even, not that they wouldn't be needed, but not to the degree that I think we kind of psych ourselves out. Oh, I don't know all the answers. I don't know the question. I don't know the answer to this. I don't know the answer to this. Man, love is, and obviously I don't mean like the Hollywood, you know, willy nilly, sometimey version of love. I mean like really, loving your neighbor as Christ has loved you. And many times our neighbor doesn't look like us, doesn't pray like us, don't have the same romantic relationships that we have, you know but authentic love and care, that's a great apologetic.
Mhm.
That is a great apologetic.
And it's a challenge for many because what I've discovered is most people, I won't say most people, but a lot of people have never been loved um,
Right,
in a way that's the most helpful sometimes.
right,
And so they can't demonstrate what hasn't been, they can't, love people because it hasn't been demonstrated for them, especially if they've had abandonment
right,
and different things. So they're struggling with what love looks like
right,
out of romantic relationships. So a
right.
lot of people they understand the concept of loving romantically, platonically they struggle.
Hmm.
And so I think it's helpful that we give people the tools on what it looks like to love people that are not, that you're not trying to marry or date, but
Right,
love people even outside of your family that are just friends in a platonic way.
right,
I think it's hard for a lot of people. So I think the church has to do a better job in using better examples because often when we talk about love, we go straight to a romantic example. And so it subconsciously feeds this thing where I only know how to love in one dimension.
right. And I know you're rapping. That's when I always, again, I guess maybe this is a good bookend. I always go back to Christ, because like I grew up not knowing my father. I had, I've been very deeply heartbroken by, women or, what have you. Like all of those things. Um, my prayer especially within the last year, has been like, I want to love others like Jesus loves me. Jesus is my example. Jesus loves me better than anyone, and it's not just a love that he says, but there's demonstration. Like, he shows us how he loved women, he shows us how he interacted with men, he shows us how he loved those that didn't love him. Like, so we have, for the people that were abused, that were unloved, that were, like, we have an example now as followers of Jesus Christ. Our job is to be the examples to others that Christ has been to us. So for those people that you're speaking about, which are legitimate and valid, that don't have those representations, we as believers, as Jesus followers, have that example. And our job is to be like how the moon is to the sun. Like, the moon doesn't have light of its own, it reflects the light of the sun. That's how we're to be as believers. We're to reflect the light of the sun to people. You know.
Mhm. Yeah. And I think that's excellent that you said that you're praying that love people like Christ loved you. And oftentimes we hear love your spouse like Christ loved the church. And so
Right,
people
right.
have this program where they say,
Yeah,
I know I gotta love my spouse the way Christ loved the church,
right.
but I don't know if I
But
gotta
not
love people.
everybody, yeah, right,
Yeah.
right.
So they have that distinction because we're
Mm-hmm.
making that distinction between romantic and platonic. And so if we could program people to say,
Mm-hmm.
love everybody like
Right,
Christ loved you and gave
right,
himself for you, then people, it might, for in their mind, start changing the
right,
dynamic
right.
of how they love people and how they are to apply Christ's love.
Mm-hmm. Amen.
What books would you recommend for those who are wanting to engage, some apologetics resources that have been extremely helpful for you? And also, how can people get in contact with you on social media?
Right, right, right. Well, I would definitely be remiss if I didn't invite people to read Jesus Among Other Gods by Ravi Zacharias. Now, it is, Ravi doesn't, it can be a little academic or wordy, but Ravi also tells, like, stories in there and whatnot. But that book really helped me a lot. It opened a lot of doors. Mere Christianity, believe it or not, by C.S. Lewis, was an awesome foundational tool, because, again, if you have apologetics with no foundation, a failure is inevitable, because you have nothing sustaining you but, random branches of knowledge. So Mere Christianity, Jesus Among Other Gods, and I gave this book to someone recently, and it was for a specific reason, but I think it can act as a kind of a jump off to other things. It's actually, again, by Ravi Zacharias. It's called The Lotus and the Cross. It's an imaginary conversation between Jesus and Buddha. And it really, because a lot of, Buddhism has kind of, or that Eastern, religions have kind of bled into Western culture, whether it's in, New Age or whatever people call it. Um, and in that conversation, you see, because I've heard a lot that, Jesus was just like Buddha. Jesus is that, and I'm like, yeah, they have things that they've agreed on, but they have a whole bunch of things where they parted ways. And I think if you understand it and see why Jesus is so distinct from, Gautama Buddha, then that will definitely, open you up and get a more clearer picture of who Jesus was and what he taught. So yeah, those three.
And how can people get a hold of you on social media?
Oh yeah, so on IG, is his name is Warner, because my name, people for some reason want to call me Warren. So I have to constantly say, no, my name is Warner. So yes, on IG, is at his name is Warner, Warner, like Warner Brothers. On Twitter, same thing. His name is Warner. And on Facebook, Warner Joseph Miller.
Awesome, Warner. Well, this has been a great time. We had several technical difficulties, but
We
I'm glad
did.
we persevered. And I appreciate the work you're doing. And I think this conversation will be extremely helpful to all those who hear it. And so thank you so much.
Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate you, sis. I appreciate you a lot.
And one of the things I believe God has pressed upon me to press upon you is to raise a generation of Christians that are courageous and are not afraid to speak the truth in love.
Imagine what would have happened if he didn't listen to her because she was a spoil of war, because she was too young, because she was a woman. Wow. He would have missed out on his healing.
I didn't ask God why when I became the first black woman to receive a PhD in Old Testament. I didn't ask God why when I became the first black woman to become the Lyman Beecher Lecturer at Yale. I didn't ask God why when Spelman made me the Cosby Visiting Professor. I didn't ask God why when I became the first black woman to receive tenure at Vanderbilt University. I'm surely ain't gonna ask God why now that I've got cancer.
I have a hope that is hard fought, hard won, and it's real.
To unflinchingly denounce the politics of fear and the alt-right racism that elected playboys while denouncing a black man who was loyal to his wife all his years in office.